as a translation workshop does, which is you find the writer is matched with the person who has the language in which the author writes. And this is, of course, a piece of cake for Spanish, Portuguese, and French. It's less of a piece of cake to find a student who will be able to translate from Bahasa, say, or from Mongolian. So there we work in the kind of equally conventional, but nonetheless more difficult system of relay translation, so that the writer either does a kind of a first draft of a translation, and then works with the American native speaker to produce a polished and an elegant version, or we sometimes work with a third writer who can participate. So in a sense, the goal here is that by hook or by crook, we are going to get those texts into English, and we always try to run the workshop so that the writer has the opportunity to introduce the language, talk about linguistic specificities, talk about grammatical specificities, talk about the features of style that is the most important to him or her. And in other words, to familiarize the whole cohort with the language in which they work. So I'll stop here for now, and there might be times to get back to it.
Many writers who have been at IWP kind of later divide their careers into pre and post IWP, their lives with this wall in the middle. And let's have a view of the residency from someone from the other side. Kyoko, you were there in 2005, and it's now 12 years since you were there. Can you look back at that in the context of your own literary career and think about what it did to you?
Okay, so I came to IWP in a little bit different, route from other writers. I'm from Japan. I grew up in Japan. My native language is Japanese, but I studied American literature and eventually changed my course to creative writing. I got my degree in creative writing in English at American University in Milwaukee. Then I got the job to teach American literature in Tokyo. And in 5 years, I got the sabbatical to spend 2 years in the United States. And I approached few of IWP at some of the literary conference, and I said, I'm interested in visiting Iowa because of writer's workshop and IWP. And he said, well, send me your stories in. And I did, and he said, I'm in. So first, I thought I was like outside observer of what Iowa City was like, this famous city of literature was like. But then when I arrived at the city, I realized I'm part of the program. And it turned out to be wonderful. And I constantly have this identity crisis of, what am I as a writer? Am I a Japanese writer? Or, I don't live in America, I don't write for American audience necessarily, but I sometimes feel like I'm also an American writer. And at IWP, no American writers are allowed. And so I had this really interesting position. And Natasha was talking about translation. And when I was at IWP, IWP actually made me a translator. We had two Australian writers, Wendy Wright and John Matier. They were both inspired by Japanese aesthetics. Wendy grew up in Japan, and she had this beautiful, straight, red, long hair, like those princesses from Heian period. And she would write love poems inspired by like Tale of Genji, etc. And she always had this demeanor of beautiful Japanese lady, although she's Australian, right? And I would be walking next to her, and I have this, that in big stride, and people used to make fun of us. And I translated Wendy's poems into Japanese and John Matier's poems into Japanese. And there was another Japanese poet who had no English, and I ended up translating his poems into English with American poet. So that's what happened.
Karim, in any sort of residency or social situation, it looks like among writers there must be two moods. One is of serenity, of beauty, of peace, of clarity, of lucidity. But there must also be some chaos, some conflict, some noise. And maybe, I don't, but you could be that sort of person as well. I just wanted to find out, what was your first day in IWP like, for instance, when you had to introduce yourself to the others? What did you say?
Well, I think that's a leading question. I'm not sure I should answer it in public, but I'll try my best. Well, on the first day, we all meet up, we don't know each other, and introductions happen. And maybe it's a nervous habit on my part, but when I kind of get nervous, I kind of joke, and it's not always appropriate. And so that was one of the occasions where I pointed out the fact that when we get picked up at the airport, it's by students or former students at the University of Iowa, and the young man who picked me up when I started talking to him told me that he was a poet. And I said, oh, well, that's interesting. And he said, well, actually, this year, all the drivers are poets. So
all the drivers are poets. It's like in Patterson.
Yeah, well, so at the introduction, when we all had to get up and just sort of say something about ourselves and introduce ourselves to the other participants, about 30 people who I'd never seen before in my life, from all over the world. So I thought I'd kind of break the ice and sort of crack a little joke, and I said that, you know you're in Iowa City because where else in the world would you be picked up in the airport and driven to the place you're staying at by a poet? It has to be Iowa City. And I said, and you know they're poets, the drivers are poets, because of the way they drive, because poets use line breaks. And these drivers were start, stop, start, stop, start, stop. I thought that was funny.
But not these people.
But unfortunately, at least one of the poets I heard afterwards was offended. But that's poets. I mean, I'm a prose writer. I have nothing to do with poets as much as possible. I try and avoid them, except for Chris. But one has to make exceptions. So.
But after that, the rest of it went well for you?
Well, sort of. Yes, I guess so. I was actually the Iowa House, which is the hotel that's attached to the university or to the Students' Union, where most of the writers stay. I think that year kind of filled out, and so I was put into a small student apartment, which I was thrilled by because it had a kitchen and I could cook my own food. I like cooking. I like my food, which is, I hope it's obvious. And so, yes, so I was able to have both privacy and be available for events. But I was one of those guys who came with a project to do, which was I was trying to finish a novel. And I pretty much knew that if I was in my normal environment at home, it would probably take me a year to write this, to finish polishing the draft and get it ready. And if I could just cut myself off from everybody I knew, I could probably get it done much faster, which is exactly what happened. I was able to complete the novel, get it published, which is the novel that's here, actually, in the bookshop. And so that was a great experience.
Vivek, you were the last Indian writer at IWP, and you are the current holder of a very good traditional Indian literature, which so many Indian writers have been there, produced work. That U.R. Ananthamurthy was there, Kiran Nagarkar was there. So please do tell us about whether things have changed. Were you at this hotel as well, or did you have a peaceful place of your own, separate from the rest? And what did you do when you were there?
This is such a fantastic residency. I was asking Chris whether I can come this year again. So people do. Yeah. And you can imagine, 30 writers living together for 2.5 months, and what can happen, the kind of, all kinds of things, fights and agreements and disagreements and whatnot. So I can't tell everything because we are, in a way, bound by an unwritten confidentiality agreement between us that we will not open our mouth. So anyway, it was interesting, but let me just share a couple of stories. It's such a great opportunity to meet writers like, there were writers from, as Chris said, from Palestine, from Israel, from, Iraq. And the writer from Iraq, Mortada, he is also a filmmaker. And when we were talking to him, it is something that is, we cannot imagine. I mean, he was saying that we will not know whether we'll be alive the next morning. The war is not over for last 15 years. It's just going on and on. And in one of his films, which was a very short 2-minute film, there is a boy who is, Iraq is full of landmines. So the film starts with a young boy trying to walk with who has perfectly normal legs, trying to walk with an artificial limb. And that's all the film is. And it's such a moving film. Then we had writers from Palestine, and who narrated a very moving incident. He was saying, there are two things that he said. One is he was saying that any love story now in Palestine has to have a security gate. Because wherever any lover who steps out has to pass through a security gate. So there can't be a love story without a security guard and a security gate, which is, The other thing he said is there was a village from where he came, and it was occupied by Israel, and then the entire village was, the people were moved out. But every year they would go back to that place, and Israel destroyed that whole place. And 5 years later, when he went with his family on the day that they left, it was an annual ritual, that they were moving around, and their house was all destroyed. His mother found her coffee mug, beneath the debris. And it was such a moving and interesting description. And these kinds of things we don't get to know about the stories, we don't get to know about what's happening in these countries unless it is in an environment like this. And living there, for 2.5 months, and we really get to know each other very closely, and we do influence each other. And what it is, how it is, I can't say, because I'm still, I still have that hangover of Iowa City. I'm sure it has some impact, and it will show up in later writing sometime in future.
But Christopher, for all those who come to the residency, it becomes clear, and it's strange, but sometimes even as writers, we're innocent of this. Part of the education of a writer comes from reading books and of writing, but the other part, and this differs for everybody, comes from meeting other writers. And it's clear that for a long time now, IWP is a place where this kind of, on the one hand, it helps everybody who arrives to live there, but there's a larger vision of cultural dialogue and diplomacy, and of America's place in as a conduit for these kinds of conversations to happen. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the past of the program, and whether you're affected by changes, for instance, in whether it's a Democrat or a Republican administration in Washington. Do these things affect you?
An interesting moment to be discussing such things. The program has been funded to a considerable degree. How about this? Yeah. It's an interesting moment to be discussing such things. The IWP has been funded to some degree or another from the beginning by the U.S. State Department as a part of what we call cultural diplomacy or soft power. The idea from the early years, and it was articulated first by the Chilean novelist José Donoso, who became Chile's Minister of Culture. He thought that if we created a place where writers from many different cultures could gather and have free and frank exchanges, a place where we could allow ourselves to go in any possible direction, that from the perspective of diplomacy, that would be a good thing. I think writers have often imagined that we expect something out of them when they come to the IWP, but in fact, as I say to them on the first day, their main priority is to write and to use this time as they see fit in whatever way will help them as writers. And we imagine that that will be a good thing, and so far the State Department has, on a year-to-year basis, agreed that that was the case. Whenever there's a change of administration, it gets complicated. And to give you an example, I was in Grant Park when Obama won in 2008. It was such a thrilling moment to be in a crowd of about 300,000 people. In fact, it's kind of funny. I had my little daughter on my shoulder. She had fallen asleep, and a cameraman came by from CNN, and she woke up just as the camera was on her. I knew she was going to end up in theater then. At our next staff meeting, I said, you know, the great thing now is that when writers arrive, they won't have, presumably, that chip on their shoulder that they've had during the Bush administration. There are a lot of people, a lot of writers just didn't want to come to America in those days. And I said, but I have this funny feeling that things might get complicated. It was just some sort of an intuition. And in fact, the first political appointee at the State Department, the person who oversaw our program, wanted to do away with the IWP. And I thought, my God, I was so passionate to have Obama in office, and now they're going to take away our livelihood. It took about 6 months of very hard work and politicking and calling in every favor I knew, and we've managed to find ourselves back in their good graces and to continue to cultivate a relationship with them. Now, of course, with the Trump administration, all bets are off, and we're just holding our breath and trying to imagine what the role of cultural diplomacy will be in this new dispensation.
So just to complement what Christopher's saying about, on one hand, the program is roughly half of the participants are funded in various forms by the State Department. Roughly half of them come on national residency grants, so say from Singapore, New Zealand, or during a number of years from Poland, etc. But I also want to stress that at the same time, the program is embedded in a university, which places a great value on the program. So from the beginning, the university infrastructure has been essential for maintaining the program. And that means that the participants are always teaching, even while they are writing, or they're invited to teach, even though, and I'd say 98% signed up from the beginning, and 1% more, as soon as they've started seeing their colleagues teach, think to themselves, oh, I would like to do that too. So it's also the second half of the mission of the program is to what one might call deprovincializing the American academia. We feel that it's very important that American students, especially those who don't grow up in the intensely cosmopolitan communities on the two coasts, have an opportunity to be fully exposed to the range of world literature that the program has to offer. And so we always teach a class called International Literature Today, where the writers come and present essentially their assignment is to talk about the process in which they work, and the students write papers on these writers. So so that's really an important, plus the participants then teach MFA students in literary translation. So there's a pedagogic dimension to it, and the goal is again to reinfuse the American infrastructure of writers with ideas about global literature and world literature and the complexities thereof that they might not be able to get out of sort of theoretical work of literary criticisms and literary history.
Well, sometimes people all over, and you must be facing this question every day, they confuse two parts of writing in Iowa. There's a very formal creative writing workshop, which is 1 or 2 years, which is very, very well known as one of the best programs in the United States. And then there's IWP, which is actually a residency, and some people think they mistake one for the other. But let's get to the nub of the question we're trying to explore today. Chris, friends, you have a view on both these programs. There's one is very unstructured. People come there, live for 2 or 3 months, meet one another. They're mid-career writers. They've done something already. And then the students have formal instruction of classes or workshops every day. And you must find that a lot of your IWP writers are a bit skeptical of the other kind of, what is that kind of dialogue like? Not between, within the program, but between the programs.
It's a wonderful question. The fact is that the Writers' Workshop is located across the street from the International Writing Program, and much of my staff went to the Writers' Workshop. And yet the relations between the two programs have been complicated from the very beginning, because when Paul Engel decided to start the International Writing Program, he took all the money he had raised for the Writers' Workshop to start the IWP, and that complicated things between the two of us. But so across the street we have graduate students who are learning to become writers, and in all the ways that a creative writing workshop runs. They take classes, they look hard at their classmates' work, they offer suggestions, and then on our side of the street the writers are doing their work. many of the visiting writers find themselves intrigued by this whole pedagogy of teaching creative writing. Once there was once the Writers' Workshop, and now there are over 300 graduate writing programs in America. Next week we will have the annual conference of the Associated Writers and Writing Programs, which will draw about 13,000 people, poet writers, fiction writers who are teachers. It's an integral part of our academic experience in the United States. And so we have a conversation going both ways, whether writing can be taught. My general feeling is that what workshops do is they can instill good writing habits in young writers. They can help writers speed up the learning process. Maybe the most important piece of the whole thing is that they offer the possibility of friendship. In my case, the closest friend of my adult life as a writer was the Kashmiri poet Agha Shahid Ali. For 20 years, he and I talked to each other on the phone every day, sometimes several times a day, and that came out of us attending a writers' conference and being in a workshop together and finding that our ideas about poetry were simpatico, and out of that grew the friendship that helps to shape a writer's life. And that's part of what goes on in a graduate program, and to another extent goes on in the IWP.
Karim, you actually are lucky among IWP writers in that you get to go back every summer, whereas the rest of us have to go back home and dream fondly of what we left behind. Because you teach another course which is for younger students, a literature and writing course in the summers. It's called Between the Lines, and you can look that up on the IWP website. But as someone who's also used to teach creative writing in Canada, where you live now, I'm sure you have many personal thoughts from your experience of different kinds of creative writing systems, and we've had some chats about this in the little time we've known one another. And I wonder if there's some sense to the fact that if you want to study creative writing, you have to be a certain age to get the most out of it, or it sets up a system of perverse incentives sometimes that only creates trouble further down the line. Do you think that's right?
Well, I teach at, yes, the summer program Between the Lines at Iowa, and it's a great program. Look it up on the website, and if you know, and to know something more about it. But we have young people from across the Middle East, Russia. I've taught some students that have sat in on the workshops and on the global literature class that I teach, from China, from we also have American students attending. I mean, the thing about creativity, just to sort of key into the topic of today's conversation, I mean, it's a faculty. I think we're born with, as children, every child plays. So imagination is something we're born with. That what we can do in creative writing workshops and in creative writing classes is hone a set of skills. But I think one of the risks that has developed over the last few years, I mean, Chris has talked about 300 courses that use a writer's workshop type format. I think there's if you pick up any book, almost any book on creative writing, you'll find that there's a series of things that they tell you have to do. And that I see that same mentality that one finds in these books being duplicated in courses. So for example, you're told you have to outline. Well, some writers are very good at outlining their stories beforehand, and most of us, frankly, are not. And that doesn't mean you can't write a novel or a short story. We're told that there's a 3-act structure that Aristotle proposed. Well, actually, Aristotle said there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Actually, that's not a big insight in terms of what a story is. Most things have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, he did not prescribe what you find in a lot of these books. He didn't talk about plot points. He didn't talk about pinch points. He didn't talk about all that sort of stuff. This is all nonsense, to be quite frank, that has accrued over a number of years because it's easy to teach this. It's easier to teach this. So there's Freytag's triangle, where you're told that there's mounting tension leading to a climax followed by a resolution. And I think the writer Iris Murdoch had the best response to that, which is, that's a description of an orgasm, not of a story. And so I think she's right. It doesn't have to be like that. And frankly, this is not the Greek method, as we're told. Homer did not adopt any of these, didn't have a 3-act structure, did not worry about plot points and pinch points. So I think there's a risk that has developed in that universities see creative writing increasingly as a way of generating income for themselves, of attracting students. And with that comes a whole method of how this should be taught, and quite often what they want is a program that can be taught by anybody. You don't have to be a writer to be able to teach it. And I think that is a terrible risk. I think it's going to be very, very damaging to the quality of writing. And it's one of the reasons why I have done less and less teaching. I've been teaching for creative writing on and off for 20 years. And I was counting last night how many countries I've actually done workshops in, and it's 11, including the US, Canada, England. For 5 years I taught at the American University in Cairo. So I think there is I think there are other ways. There's a more organic way of teaching, but I don't want to take up too much time from everybody else.
No, just to follow that very briefly, I suppose, should we say that part of becoming a writer is the experience of disappointment or rejection, and learning from that you have to move, and when you pay money, or sometimes your parents pay money to get a degree in creative writing, you kind of feel the industry then has a responsibility to support you the rest of your life too, to publish you, and then what happens to that?
Yeah, I think one of the problems with creative writing being taught at universities is that universities teach things such as law degrees, medicine, engineering, and these are careers. You go in and you do your years, you pay your fees, and you go out and you get a job and you build a career. It is not like that as a writer. Maybe 10%, and I think maybe I'm exaggerating, of graduates from writing programs actually end up publishing anything that they would not have published had they not done the program. I mean, publishers operate on the basis of, can we sell this? And it doesn't matter who's recommending whom. It gives them some reassurance to know that you've been to maybe a famous program somewhere, but that is no guarantee that they're going to publish you, and there's no guarantee that they're going to sell. And Walter Benjamin made a very important point, I think, when he talked about the need for a writer to have an essential experience. And that is an experience, a life experience that they can then develop into, that gives them an insight into life that they can then develop into a story or a series of stories. And I think that quite often with creative writing programs, what happens is you get students coming straight out of bachelor degrees, sometimes in creative writing, going into master degrees in creative writing with actually very little life experience. You need to get out there and sort of be kicked around a bit by life, and have your heart broken and maybe run over by a bus a few times, and then when you're sort of being nice and it's like making hamburgers. I mean, this is tying it into an American reference, right? So the Americans here can feel comfortable. But you have to kind of beat up. You have to hammer the meat really hard to soften it. Well, that's kind of what has to happen to writers. We have to kind of live a bit. And I think one of the problems is with these programs is that the students are coming in way too inexperienced. And if you look at the major writers, they have all the major writers right up until the 50s, and maybe even creeping into the 60s before writers got employed by universities. I think that's really where, in a sense, the corruption happened. When we started getting an income so that we could live and feed ourselves and have families, our writing started to deteriorate as we found ourselves spending our time at universities and not actually getting out into life and having that kind of
Natasa,
impact.
yes.
Yeah, I wanted to turn the tables and ask you, Chandrahas. Not only are you an IWP alum, but you are somebody whose literary career has traveled in a completely different direction, and you've been incredibly successful. And you're always the one asking questions. You're always the ones asking the good questions because you know what you're talking about. But you are blessedly free of a workshopped MFA. So why don't you talk about your writing career?
Thank you. I will never resist an invitation like that, but you'll have to tell me when to stop. Actually, I'm going to answer this and also turn this back on Kyoko because I agree with that, and perhaps this is my. I'm conscious when I criticize the creative writing system from the outside that perhaps it's just because I wasn't part of it, so I can't see what's good about it. But it always seemed to me that in India, there's very few creative writing degrees even now. And so what you did, typically, if you were thought to be artistically talented, was that you did like a literature degree, like an academic degree. But there was something very wonderful about that, in that like your job was to discover what was brilliant about other people's work, not what would potentially be wonderful about your own. And that sense of pleasure, of admiration, of a whole world of meanings opening. I'm sure there's some conversation between this and a creative writing degree because you do learn other people's work. But it's not with a naked or singular goal of becoming a writer yourself. It's something a bit more disinterested than that. And I feel there's something about the spirit of literature that demands this kind of attitude, that you love people for who they are, whether they were successful or not. And you read through a wide range of years, of centuries, and even you develop a respect, not because I see so many writers actually very contemptuous of reviewers and literary critics, as if, but I think that's a very limited view of what the profession is for. The literary critic or reviewer is not there, is himself or herself a writer who's trying to strike up a conversation with the reader over the topic of your book. You yourself as a person are not involved in that. And I think so many writers who can't let themselves go when they see their books reviewed or criticized. So in a way, I think a training in literature where you learn how to read and to write about other writers, I found in my own life it has given me a certain kind of detachment and then ability to see things separately from your own work. And in that way, I also feel like, although I write novels myself, what I really like is the larger sky of my life in literature, that I read, I write about other people's books, I put anthologies together. I used to work at the Caravan, publishing new Indian writers, which is a very exciting field right now, and the chance of discovering somebody, including many young writers who had never even been to a writing school, but who had worked something out for themselves. So maybe we should divide ours into the tough guy school, though many of us are anything but tough in real life, of creative writing, and where you make your mistakes in life and you often write terrible, terrible books. And then you meet, actually when I went to Iowa, I realized when I met some people in the creative writing program that all the things that had taken me 10 years to learn, they had, by having good teachers, actually worked through those things quite quickly. Yeah. Whether from that they were ready then to write books of their own, I'm not quite sure. So we should also, I think, qualify this with, it's often said that the time you really appreciate your BA, your undergraduate degree, is when you're 30. At that time, you have no clue about like why are these writers so good. You sometimes are very cynical about like trying to study for exams and stuff. It's afterwards that you realize what a great education it was. And it's the same, I think, also for being a writer. You could learn the technical side of writing, and that's very good when you're in your 20s. But you have to be, unless something very unusual has happened to you, at least about 30, I feel, before you have the life experience to turn your books into a genuine vision, not a workshopped or a machine-knitted kind of vision of literature. And that's all I'm going to say right now. Vivek, if you want to add to that, that would be good.
I think I agree with you, because there is no creative writing program in India, or if there's one or two undergrad programs. But the literature program is what really produced writers, the undergrad as well as graduate programs. The other thing that happens in my language, the Kannada, in which I write, is the senior writers are always accessible to the younger writers. And there is a lot of discussion that happens. People respond to the younger writers, and it is almost like, considered as their duty. Barring one or two people, everyone is accessible, and that is how I grew, and that is how, I was taught, if I can say, right? And now I feel that it is my duty if somebody, a younger writer, comes to me. So there is a tradition of responding to younger writers, discussing with them, etc., etc. You spoke about reviewing, right? There is one thing, reviews, book reviews, which appear in public. But I think the value of real criticism comes in these informal groups where people discuss, where there is nothing at stake. Otherwise, you go out in public and there is an opinion, you want to say it in public, it gets printed. I don't think there is much value, at least I can talk for myself, that, which comes out of this. But these small groups discussions have immense impact, and I have learned a lot from these things. And that tradition, hopefully, is still intact, and I hope it continues in these languages.
Kyoko?
As somebody who's gone through creative writing program in America, it's not just you learn how to write in that program, and it's not just me saying this, but what you learn at creative writing program in a lower undergraduate level, or MFA or a PhD level, is you will learn most of all how to read. And that from my workshop experience, I would have like 20 to 30 fellow students, and my story is being read very attentively, right? Close reading, and they write comments and discuss my story. And out of 20, probably 2 persons come up with brilliant insights. So these are supposed to be all writers, and half of them, they get the story, but at the same time, they kind of provide rather dull comments, and it's mostly my story's fault, right? But at the same time, you learn that you really have to read well, and also readers won't get everything you try to say. And that we even joke there are more writers wannabe than readers. And the most important part about survival of literature is that to educate to readers rather than making more writers, and that's what creative writing does, I think. Lots of people say that, and I agree with it. Another thing I learned in my graduate program in Milwaukee is there's something really ethical about teaching of creative writing. And this is the core of my experience in the graduate program, that there's this unsaid contract between students, instructor and students. We're all trying to create these pieces of literature, the object of our fascination. And whether you're bad at it, or whether you're going to be a successful writer, or you're going to be engineer in the future who has written in the past, whatever you'll become, your desire is legitimate. We're going to pay serious attention. We pay respect to each other. There's this unwritten rule, and that's the most precious experience I had in the classroom. And you know that you don't have to pay tuition to get that. If you're lucky, if you go to the right places, or you're determined, you get the same thing outside classroom. But if you're unlucky, you might go to a creative writing program that doesn't provide that kind of support.
Great. I think we have a little bit of time, and you must want to ask questions. So you, sir, and then. But if you keep them short, then as a courtesy, then everyone can ask questions. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I've got 2 questions addressed to Christopher. Number 1 is, I have researched your website, and it says I want to apply actually. What is the question is, what is literary-based resume or CV? I'm not clear, number 1. Secondly, generally it is understood that by creative writing means fiction writing, which is, I think, I'm challenging. I'm a non-fiction writer and reader, and I want to apply for the program. That's why I have done research and I have registered.
Very quickly, Christopher, he's asking whether creative writing only means fiction, and does the IWP only accept fiction writers under the idea of creative writing? We'll take one question and
Well, in our program, we take poets, fiction writers, playwrights, screenwriters, essayists, and indeed at the University of Iowa, we have graduate programs in all of the literary disciplines. So we don't distinguish between them. What we're most interested in is the quality of the work. And if it's interesting enough, if it's original enough, then that's somebody we might consider being a part of our program. I wanted to mention one other thing which might be of interest to you, and that is that because we bring so many interesting writers to the University of Iowa, we've created these massive open online courses, MOOCs, and we have literally thousands of students take these. They're absolutely free. All you have to do is sign up for them, and you get to watch videos with terrific writers from all around the world talking about different aspects of the craft of writing, poetry, fiction. We're about to launch one in poetry and playwriting. And they also offer tips about the writing life, which is, I think, one of the things that, that comes out of a graduate writing program. When we were hearing about the ethical part of a creative writing workshop, part of what we're doing is trying to figure out how to live our lives. Young writers look to older writers to be models. We read books as models. They help us to figure out how we're going to do what we're going to do. And so in our MOOCs, we offer some of that.
Let's have some questions from young, what about you? Yes.
Good morning. I really enjoyed this session from you wonderful, humorous people. So my question to you is that, is it true that creativity often, does it come when you're actually working very hard at it, pounding the pestle, you know, putting down pages after pages? Like, is it more of a thing of hard work, or is it that you write when you're inspired? Like, is it, they often say if you just keep at it long enough, then the creativity will come, it will come. So is that true, or you just wait?
Who's going to answer? Karim, it looks like you're ready.
I saw you nod at me, so I hear and obey. For me, it's a profession. I get up in the morning, and that's what I do. And I write every day, sometimes for many hours, sometimes maybe for 3 hours, sometimes for 10 hours. And the job is not just putting words on paper. If I can just share with you a 6-word story to illustrate my point. This is attributed to Ernest Hemingway. And the story goes like this: for sale, baby shoes, never worn. Okay? The story is not in the words. It's in the never worn. It's the implication. When you read that, you start thinking, well, why are the baby shoes for sale? What happened to the baby? What happened to the mother? Did something terrible go on there? Was it simply that somebody gave them too many shoes? But it's in the omissions. It's in what isn't there. That process requires, first of all, a lot of research in the writing to get your story, to know your story, and then to know how to edit that down so that the story becomes there in the omission. And that's how you draw your readers in and get them engaged. And that process of research, writing, and then editing, and it's particularly the editing, can take a lot of time and a lot of effort, because you over-edit, you get nonsense. You under-edit, it's boring. You're losing an effect. And so it's a full-time job as far as I'm concerned. I do it every day.
By the way, I should quickly say that I met a writer at IWP who remarkably only types with one finger, all over like a bird pecking at like grain. But he writes very, very fat books, so this is one of the greatest miracles I've ever seen in literature. Did you want to say? Yeah, we also should take more questions.
Just a quick comment on this. I think it is important to engage with writing every day, not because you want to write and produce something, but so that you are never disengaged with it. And I agree with Karim that it's also what is important is to know what is a false start, because many times you go on a wrong road And then because you have put in so much of effort, you don't want to come back, and then you end up with something that you don't want. So it is important to recognize this and discard.
Yeah, you at the back, please. Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you for such a wonderful session. My question is directed towards Karim. Yeah.
The crowd favorite.
You spoke about the beginning, middle, and end by Aristotle, and then you talked about how you cannot apply, you shouldn't be following climax and following action and resolution. So how do you go about teaching students of creative writing when they enroll for your course?
No, what I'm really trying to say is that it's not a one, what's the expression? Sorry, one size fits all. Thank you.
Such a helpful audience, yes.
Yeah, I'm so used to writing, I'm not used to speaking. But yes, that it's not a one size fits all. If you're the kind of writer who can outline a story and then write it to the outline, well, that's great, that's wonderful. But that doesn't apply to most writers, and I think it's very debilitating, actually, to many writers to be told learn this way. There isn't one way. The same goes for the standard 3-act structure that you find in books. If that works for you, great, wonderful. But for many stories, when you read, and I agree totally that actually a writer is a reader who writes. And that's really the important message. A writer is a reader who writes. And it's through reading that you discover the way forward for yourself. And whenever I start teaching a course, I start off by saying to the students, I know this is scheduled as a creative writing course, but what I'm going to teach you is how to read better, because by reading better, you may become better writers.
We also have a question from Afar from Sanjay Srivastava of Noida, who's asking, is creativity mood-driven or is there a science to it? But this young lady also asked the same thing, so maybe we can move on to... you wanted to ask a question, sir? Yeah, but I think we should indulge our audience. Yeah, can you? There. I'm so sorry to some of the rest of you. I know I can see all your hands. We just don't have time.
You have already hinted at this process of creativity, but haven't addressed it directly. I did a writer's course in Oxford University, summer school, short course, and when I asked the question, generally the answer was, when I asked how to evaluate which work is better than the other, how do you, evaluate? And the general answer was, it's finally, it comes down to your gut feeling. What moves you, what touches you. Can I ask the same question to you? Thank you.
Kyoko, you want to answer that? When what is a judgment of quality? Is that what you're asking? How do you, and some people say it's based on your gut feeling, whether you're moved by it or not. But is that all there is to deciding what is good and what is not?
In a classroom environment, I think it comes to craft, that whether it's, the language is handled well or not. I think that comes down to it. And with beginning writers, especially in undergraduate levels, other issues like themes and subject matter, etc., doesn't really matter. I think it really is, if you look at 100 beginning writers' writings, it's not too difficult to tell which ones handle language better or not.
Okay, I think sadly we have run out of time, and in case you want to chat with any of our great panelists today, they are signing their books outside, so you can meet them there. Thank you so much, all of you.